Back in my kitchen remodel, it's time to add a countertop on top of these cabinet boxes, and to build that I'll be using epoxy. Now the first step is building a base, which I'm using 2 layers of 1/2 inch MDF. Starting with the first layer, I go one piece at a time to make sure everything is going to fit properly. And now a track saw is probably the best tool you can have for this type of project. And of course, if you want, you can use a circular saw with a straight edge, but a track saw really comes in handy when you start templating things out and you just want to cut exactly on a line rather than trying to measure an offset for a straight edge with a circular saw. Now, part of the reason I'm going one piece at a time is with the first piece here, and as I go along, I'm going to attach these to the cabinet to get that out of the way. And also it makes it easier for measuring because I know pieces aren't going to move around on me. I'm filling any cracks and voids with just standard wood filler, but for epoxy countertops, Bondo seems to be a pretty popular choice instead. Now, because this gets pretty messy, I'm going to surround the cabinets and floor with a lot of plastic. The epoxy countertop route I'm going is pour over. That's going to make a huge mess, so I want to make sure that I'm protecting the floor I just installed and also the cabinets. You can cut out your sink before or after, but I'm choosing first because it's easier and cheaper to fix a mistake now if I cut out the wrong size hole. I just want to jump in quick to make a point about the tape dam. Now there's a couple approaches to get the lip on the countertop, and the first approach is going the mold route, and that's what I was thinking initially. Basically, you make a mold along the edge, and then you pour the epoxy, let it cure, and then you take the mold off. Now, that works okay, but the problem is I have a lot of angles. So I really didn't want to go through the effort of making that entire mold. You also have to be very careful to make sure the mold itself doesn't have any points where it's leaking. Now, the approach here, the tape dam, this is where you pour the epoxy, you let it sit for a few hours, and then you remove the tape and kind of let it pour over. It's thicker at that point, so it just pours over a little, but that's why you need so much plastic around so it doesn't get on the floor. So that's the route I'm going to try. I thought I'd talk about fails that can happen for epoxy countertops, how
to avoid them and how to fix your mistakes. So the first pour you just saw me do, that failed. I waited about 2.5 hours before pulling the tape dam, and that was my fault. I lost track of time, and the epoxy gelled up too much where it wouldn't flow over the edge properly. And so I trimmed off all the edges, ran a new tape dam, did a second pour, and that time I waited an hour, hour and a half before pulling the tape dam, and the timing was proper there. It's recommended between an hour and 2 hours, depending on temperature and humidity, before you pull the tape dam and let it pour over. But you can see I made a second mistake here. This is a result of that. I completely forgot to re-prime the edge of the MDF. So you can see brown shining through here on the edge. So just a reminder, make sure you prime all the MDF because it helps with situations like this. So to fix this, I have to do a third pour, but before the pour, I sanded all the epoxy, and I'm going to take more of the undercoat and paint the edges and a little bit on the top. That'll stick to epoxy if you sand it because it creates a mechanical bond. After that cures, I'm going to run a new tape dam and do a third pour, and I'll show you the results of that after it succeeded.
It's been about an hour since I did the re-pour here, and you see me checking the epoxy with my finger. I'm sticking my finger in the epoxy and lifting it up, and I want to make sure that at least an inch above the surface, the epoxy is still sticking to my finger. That's telling me it's gelled up enough to remove the tape dam. And now this is important because you want the epoxy to stay on the countertop, but also flow over the edge slightly. If you have places where the epoxy isn't covering as it's flowing over, all you have to do is smudge it up a little bit with your finger so you get epoxy there, and then it will flow over and level out nicely. My last step here is using a plastic scraper to scrape away all of these drips, and even though you can see it's still dripping here, this does seem to stop it or at least slow down the flow a little bit. But an option here, alternative to this, is using a router with a flush trim bit after everything dries.